I want to welcome everybody here today. The program on the census is certainly a timely one and certainly central to our representative government, because the number of people in our area determines the number of representatives we have and the amount of money we get from Washington. And speaking of representatives, our group usually has representatives from many parts of our community, and today I want to welcome a couple of those people who are, some are new to this meeting. One is Reverend Lisa Mason. She is the new rector of St. John's Episcopal Church in Larchmont. Comes to us from Texas, where she was very involved in the community and plans to do so here as well. Welcome, Reverend Mason. And we have two students from Joe Liberti's government class called the Original Civic Resource Action Group. Is that correct? Okay, that's Olivia and Jackson. Welcome, Olivia and Jackson. We hope you get a lot out of the meeting this morning, too. And I'm now going to turn the meeting over to Jeff, who has our 2-minute tidbit. And then we'll have a few announcements before the program.
Good morning, everyone. So I've decided that this year I'm going to do a bit on neighborhoods. And if those who were here last time heard about Foxhole Acres, for those who weren't here, Foxhole Acres is Elkin Park in the town of Mamaroneck, next to Central School on Palmer Avenue. And those are 12 buildings with 50 units that were built by local GIs after the war. We have a lot of neighborhoods, and the question is how they came about. And they, as our area was developed, a lot of them came from farms and estates, and our roads and subdivisions were named after them. So, and some of these neighborhoods are not well known to people who have lived here for years. I mean, I've often said, how many people know that in Mamaroneck, the lowland on Mamaroneck Avenue is called the Heights, and the high area is called the Knolls. You know, but so you have to know your neighborhoods. Well, I have an interesting little neighborhood. The unincorporated area of the town of Mamaroneck was the last to be developed. I have an area bordered by Edgewood Avenue and Lookout Circle between Chatsworth and Murray Avenues. This area, does anybody know what this area was called in the early part of the 1900s? Shantytown. Shantytown. All right? So from about 1900 to the middle to the end of World War I, 120 families resided in unheated wood-frame dwellings that were no more than packing cases covered with tar paper in barracks-like conditions. Most of them came from Italy, and they were workers, and they worked in the construction for the construction companies that developed that area. For example, there was one of the biggest contractors was a guy named Michael DeSico, who built foundations with they call a horse and scoop, with a horse and just a scoop, and they created foundations. A lot of the crews up there were extras in D.W. Griffith films. They came here with the promise of 75 cents a day. Rent was $1 a year. The land was owned by Jack Barnett, grandson of James Barnett, an original partner in the Chatsworth Land Company of 1853. The property, after World War I and the families moved out, the property was condemned, and it was acquired by the Hillside Holding Company, and a new subdivision was planned. One of the local families that you see throughout the history of Mamaroneck to this day is the Carpino family. And Carl Carpino Sr. Was born in Shantytown, actually born in Shantytown in 1908. The Carpino family, they all became members of the town of Mamaroneck Fire Department, descended, one of them is a Bruno that had Larchmont Tavern. They were well known in the area, and still. One of Mr. Carpino's daily chores was to carry 6 pails to a well to get fresh water for his family. The women washed their clothes on rocks by a stream, and in winter had to break through the ice. Ashes from coal furnaces were used as a bleach to whiten clothes. The stream at the intersection of Edgewood and North Chatsworth Avenues has been paved over, but the well still stands at North Chatsworth and Lookout Circle. Mr. Carpino fondly recalls his trips to the rocking stone, where the children would sit on and rock on top of the huge magical boulder, so perfectly balanced it could lean from side to side. Picnics in the Larchmont Woods gave the area its nickname, the Kettle Hill. So that is Shantytown and my story for today.
Before we start, we give an opportunity, thank you so much, Jim, for any announcements. Are there any announcements?
Good morning, everyone. I'm Maury Tamron. I'm the chair of the Larchmont Historic Preservation Task Force. Some of you may remember that a year ago we made a presentation, a panel discussion about historic preservation in Larchmont and our efforts. I know you're all very busy and anxious to get on with the panel, so I'll be very brief. I think some of you may remember, or those who were here last year, one of the main efforts that many of the municipalities who have enacted preservation legislation have undergone is to commission a historic resources survey so that a professional architectural historian can really look at the municipalities and record which properties might very well be eligible for designation. So this last year, one of the main things that we have done, and I'm happy to announce, is that we put in an application to the Preservation League of New York State for a grant to help fund a historic resources survey for Larchmont, and were awarded $10,000, and we're moving ahead with this survey. So I'm happy to announce that, and I'd like to invite anybody who is a village resident to join us for a kickoff event, which will be held at the Larchmont Village Center on October 29th at 7:30. So the mayor will make a few comments, I'll make a few comments, and Neil Larson, who is the principal of the firm that will be conducting the survey, will be there to introduce the process and kick off the event. So I have invitations. If anybody who would like an invitation, please raise your hand and I'll distribute them. And I also have our FACS, Historic Preservation in Larchmont brochure. If anybody would like one of those, I'll distribute them. So thank you so much for letting me make this announcement today.
Thank you. And now I'm going to turn the program over to, yes, I'm sorry.
Hi,
yes.
I have a quick announcement.
Oh, sure, I'm sorry.
My name is Pastor Marvin Hank from St. John's Lutheran Church, right down the street here, and we're giving a concert, and it's the Brandenburg Concertos by Bach, and so it's a pretty amazing group, an orchestra, and so forth. It's going to take place on October 20th at 4 o'clock. If you like Bach, you're going to like this. So you're all welcome. Does anybody need would anybody want a flyer? Anyone want to post it somewhere for us? Somewhere, Pat? I know. Okay. Would you like some more? Yeah. Take them. Thank you.
I also want to welcome George Latimer. I saw him walk in. Welcome. We always like, who's ubiquitous. We welcome him to our program today, too. And now, who is Ann? I'm turning the program to Ann Bukowski.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, and good morning. We're very excited to hear about the census this morning. We're bringing our speakers. Participation in the 2020 census is essential if Westchester County is going to get its fair share of the more than $850 billion that the federal government will allocate in more than 320 vital programs. The census process determines the number of congressional representatives for each state, and that information is vital to our community. Nonprofit organizations play a critical role in helping ensure that everyone counts. The Westchester Complete Census Committee will partner with community leaders to raise awareness about the census and increase participation. Having worked the 2010 census, collecting information and going door-to-door in Yonkers, it was a great experience, and our biggest challenge was convincing people how important each count is and to be counted. Here today to speak about the importance of the census is Mr. Owen Borda and Ms. Norma Drummond. Owen Borda is a community partnership specialist with the New York Regional Office of the U.S. Census Bureau. In this role, he works with a range of community, governmental, educational, and faith-based organizations with the goal of achieving a complete count in the 2020 census with every person counted once in the right place. He is a retired employee of the Westchester County Department of Health, currently teaches healthcare administration at the MBA and PhD levels, and is an ordained deacon. His PhD is from the Union Institute and the University in Cincinnati, Ohio. Norma is the Commissioner of Planning for Westchester County. She took the helm of the department with more than 30 years of extensive community and economic development experience, including managing a number of the county's federal grants. She has extensive experience with affordable housing and community development programs, including CDBG, HOME, ESG, HOPWA, lead hazard control, lots of letters, and the Section 8 Housing Choice Voucher Program. She is a past president of the National Association for County Community and Economic Development. In 2009, she was recognized by the New York State Association for Affordable Housing as their Advocate of the Year. She has served on the board of the National Association of Counties Community and Economic Development Steering Committee and the NYS Association of Redevelopment and Housing Officials, and on several other nonprofit boards. She has served on local planning and zoning boards for almost 20 years, including currently serving as the chair of a local zoning board of appeals after serving over 10 years on a local planning board with over 5 years of chair of that board. She has an undergraduate degree in economics, history, and political science, and a master's in public administration, and is married with 4 children. So we welcome them. Very experienced people up here. Yes. So we welcome.
I can't count any of them, believe it or not. I'll tell you why.
After their presentation, there'll be an opportunity for questions. We welcome them, and thank you again for coming.
Well, good morning. It's been a very long time since I made that trip from Peekskill down and across and down. And it's a pleasure. I'm just so excited to be back in this part of the county. So the Census Bureau has had a lot of positive and negative press recently, and I'm here to give you some basic information. Norma's going to make it all localized. The Census Bureau is interested in only one thing: counting people once, only once, in the place where they're going to sleep on April 1st or in the right place. And there's some variations to the location, but once and only once. We are not a regulatory agency. We do not collect information on what we see. All we're interested in doing is counting people and asking them to answer 7 simple questions. We don't collect social security numbers. We don't want driver's license. We don't need credit card numbers. 7 simple questions that are held in great confidentiality. Okay? All of us who work for the Census Bureau take an oath under Article 13. And if we violate our oath for the rest of our life, we go to jail and we pay a huge fine. So anything we see or hear as part of the census, we are not able to transmit. We're not mandated reporters. So that when we gather information, we want people to feel confident we are not bringing that back to some other authority. When your information is put up online, no one has access to that information, and that has been tested in the courts time and time again. This year, the census will be done in several ways. You'll be able to answer online. You'll be able to answer on your phone. You'll be able to answer by paper before an enumerator will come to knock on your door. So our goal is to get everyone to answer the census online, by phone, or by paper when they receive their invitation starting March 16th. A continuous flow of invitations will come for about 6 weeks after that date to encourage people to answer the census. Once the census information is gathered, the name of that address is taken off the master list, so nobody bothers you ever again. So, we say this in many ways, but answer your census early. Accurately, the 7 questions, get them in, and then you never have to worry about us for another 10 years. And no one will knock on your door. Now, if someone comes through the door, people are identified with the census. They have their badges, they have their census notebooks, and a lot of people are nervous about answering, right? We always focus on some populations. The elderly are very nervous about answering the door, about providing information, sharing. We have a number of undocumented, right, who are living in under the radar. We have people who are living in multiple dwellings. I mean, multiple living in a single dwelling, which means, 4 or 5 people rent rooms. And those people are difficult for us to count. But the most difficult group for us to count are children. Families are reticent to report the number of children in their location. So when we're thinking about hard to reach, we immediately go to the other, and it's really internal. We have to talk with parents about being sure they report their children. This is a very, very important and undercounted population of people. Because what comes from counting children? Schools, daycare centers, medical facilities. We need to know where those kids are. So we have an extensive outreach to schools. We have an extensive outreach to PTAs. I'm actually speaking with the New York State PTA Council on Friday about some other initiatives. And we want everyone to be involved in this. Here in the Larchmont Mamaroneck Avenue, we're working with municipal leadership to create local complete count committees, which are organizations like the county's Complete Count Committee that bring people together to help problem solve and identify ways to reach each community, because each community is unique. What we would do in Tarrytown is not going to work in Larchmont or Mamaroneck. Each community is unique. So we need your help. I know that you don't meet in between, so this is when I'm going to speak to you. This is the pitch. Be sure that you're involved in some way with your municipal Complete Count Committee or with the county's Complete Count Committee to help us be sure that in Larchmont Mamaroneck we have a complete and accurate count. The other thing you can help us all do is we are currently in the midst of what's called Tinsel, and it's our effort to identify the homeless. Now, we know where everybody is who's in shelters. We work with the shelter system, we work with the police, the county is a great partner for us, but in every community there's that one building where people sort of hang out that nobody really talks about. Those are the people I want to find. The people that are living under an underpass across 95, the people that might be living in an abandoned building someplace hidden up on a hill. We need to count those people too. So if you know anyone, have any idea where those locations are, I'm going to have cards back on the counter. Take a card, write me a note or phone me up. If you have another organization that needs to know this information, we're available at all times to help support you. So we count every person once in the right place. We have extreme confidentiality measures. You can answer your census on the phone, by computer, on paper before an enumerator comes. And finally, everything that we do is done in English and Spanish, as well as other key languages. You can answer in your survey in Italian, for example, if you're a native Italian speaker and have not been assimilated, into using English. So we have support, and then we have 58 other languages that we support to be sure that language is not a barrier. So I think that's all I have to say. Norma has a lot of information that brings us down to the local level.
Good morning, everyone. Some of you may remember I was here a couple months ago talking about affordable housing. But the census is actually so much more exciting. I actually had somebody say to me, actually it was a Board of Legislators committee meeting that said, who would have thought that a census could be a really riveting conversation? So prepare, guys, you're gonna learn something this morning. So we're gonna start with, we are 174 days away from April 1st, from Census Day 2020. This is our one opportunity every 10 years to get every person in Westchester County counted. And why is it important? Let me start by telling you right now, the distribution of sales tax that comes to Mamaroneck Village, Mamaroneck Town, and to Larchmont is based right now on the 2010 census. All right? It's important for every municipality to count every single person, but I'm going to bring it so much more local to Westchester, as Owen said. I let him do the bigger picture stuff, and then I tell you why am I worried, first off, and then why is it important, and in each and every one of you should be worried. So the census is mandated by the Constitution. The United States did its first decennial census in 1790. This is not our first rodeo. This is not the first time we've been doing this. And so, again, it's mandated by the Constitution. We are required to count everybody in the country every 10 years. The numbers are used to determine how many seats in Congress we have, but it's also where the line should be drawn for our county board of legislators, okay? It's as local as that. Again, it's very important to the county. It's the equitable distribution of funds, and really it's used for anybody like me and all of our nonprofit agencies. We use this data for the next 10 years. It is so critical for us to get this data right. So what's new with this census? As Owen said, this is the first time you're going to be answering the census online. All right, the census started working on the 2020 census in 2011. There was a lot of technology to start building up and put into place because we all answered the census in 2010 on paper. So there was a lot of technology, there was a lot of work that had to be done because there's a lot of cost savings to the Census Bureau to be able to get people to respond online. And we are going to be able to see the results of who's actually responding online in much more live time this time around. We're going to be able to see how the responses are coming back in each of our municipalities. And again, just to start bringing it right home to you guys right away, I had a map distributed to you. This is based on the 2010 census. These are what we're defining as the hard to count areas in Mamaroneck Village, the town, and Larchmont. So, you know, I'm going to go through it. Most of these areas are in the village, as you can imagine. But I'm starting right now with telling you these are the areas that had less than the average response rate for the mail returns last time around. It does not mean that the people were not counted. It just meant that the Census Bureau had to do more work to go out and make sure that the folks were counted and found. So the Census Bureau, as I started, they started working on this in 2011. The decennial census is not the only thing they work on. In the in-between years, they do building permit surveys, they do economic surveys, they do surveys of jails, they do all sorts of other surveys. The most important one and the most commonly used one is what we call the American Community Survey. And that's where they survey about 300,000 households all across the country every month, asking them what used to be the long-form census questionnaire, where they would ask you a lot more information about how much do you rent, how much do you pay for your rent, how much are you paying for your home, you know, your monthly utilities, all sorts of different questions to be able to get more anecdotal data about the people and the people who live in the neighborhoods. So the ACS, the American Community Survey, is still continuing. But again, that's a different assignment for the Census Bureau. This decennial census, or the Census 2020, is really just this once every 10-year public effort. But there's a lot that gets done behind the scenes. So to let you kind of take it home a little bit easier, I'm going to take you back to just basic census terminology. The census starts at the lowest level on a block. When you think of a block is in fact one side of the street going down the other side of the street, going around the back and coming. So the address across the street is not in the same block. It's actually a different block. So in terms of giving people a level of comfort, one of the most important things about the census information is the fact that it's really hard to identify any specific household as you're responding to the census. Part of the reason is, as I just said, that block is simply a block. It's one side of the street, and your neighbor across the street is a different block. Unless you live on a cul-de-sac, that's going to be a little bit different. But the Census Bureau never releases data at the block level. Generally, the lowest form of data that ever gets released is the block group level, and that's a multiple of block groups with generally a combined census anywhere between 600 and 3,000 people living in that block group. And some of those block groups may include blocks that are all commercial, all industrial areas. But the block group level ideally has about 1,500 people living in it. So when you're releasing data about 1,500 people, it's a little hard to be able to say, oh, that's that household. It's just not going to be possible. But from there, the block groups, we go up to the census tract. Many of you are much more familiar with the fact of the census tract. So every county in New York has its own census tract system. They start generally from the southern part of the county. In our case, it starts in Yonkers, and the numbers work their way up. But the census tracts could have as many as 8,000 people in a census tract. It's a combination of multiple block groups. The ideal is to have about 4,000 people in a census tract. So again, basic census geography to help people understand that your data really does stay confidential because it's so hard to identify just one person within a specific area. So generally I would do this as a PowerPoint, just so you know, because there's so much to cover. So number one reason why I am, as Commissioner of Planning, why I am worried about the census. In summer of 2018, our office, the Westchester County Department of Planning, is a census affiliate. So we are in fact a keeper of census data for the New York State census area, and we become the place that everybody comes to get local census data for anything related to Westchester. So in 2018, the summer of 2018, my staff reviewed 370,000 housing unit addresses. Now, officially, there are only 345,800 housing units in Westchester County. That's 24,000 housing units that the Census Bureau doesn't know about, but that we found addresses for. That's number one reason why I'm worried about. 24,000, now assuming they're not all going to be occupied, but 24,000 housing units is the difference between Westchester being under 1 million people and over 1 million people, okay? So if we found 24,000 addresses and the attics, the basements, so living over the garage, you know, apartment number 1 ABC, one, you know, however many. At one point, by the way, early in my career, I lived in Portchester, and I swore there was a rent-a-mattress operation going on across the street. There was always somebody sitting outside kind of waiting for their turn to go inside and go sleep. So, I mean, things like that happen in urban areas. There's just no question. So the Census Bureau has a challenge in trying to, in fact, you know, what legally, maybe that's a 2-family house, but in reality, how many families are really living in there, and how do you identify all the different rooms that get occupied? So it was quite a challenge for our staff to identify. But again, number one reason that I'm concerned is there are 24,000 more addresses that we found than what the official count is of housing units. One of the other things that, again, we do so much work behind the scenes to help the Census Bureau get ready. Last fall, one of the things we had to do was to what we call the boundary and annexation survey data. That's where we actually had to take a look at the data that the Census Bureau had for the boundary lines of every municipality, because of course you want everybody who lives in Larchmont to be counted with Larchmont. Well, we actually found an error. Part of the town of Mamaroneck, the unincorporated part of Mamaroneck, there's this little strip that comes down. Part of that strip was actually being counted. The Census Bureau has the boundary wrong, and they're counting that block as the city of New Rochelle. But it also then, the other side of the boundary, they're taking a street from Larchmont and putting it in the town of Mamaroneck, unincorporated Mamaroneck. So Larchmont is then losing. So we actually had to identify that that was a mistake in the Census Bureau's boundaries, and we sent it to them. We're waiting to see whether they're going to accept it or not. But again, that's all the work that gets done behind the scenes that nobody really has any idea that we're doing this work once every 10 years. The next level of data that we had to do was identifying the participant statistical areas that the Census Bureau will use. Those are, in fact, like breaking up areas of, for example, the city of Peekskill has one, remember I told you census tract can have anywhere between, well, up to 8,000 people, and the optimum is 4,000. There's a census tract up in the city of Peekskill. There's actually 2 that are getting on the large side. And so the Census Bureau was recommending splitting, in a kind of convoluted way, both of these census tracts to create 4 instead of just the 2 census tracts. We reviewed it with the city of Peekskill, and they actually said, you know what, we want to keep it for one more census, let's leave it as it is, because it's kind of easier to compare apples to apples as opposed to changing things. Likely they're going to have to split it at some point in the future, but again, reviewing that now. That's part of the stuff that we do ahead of time as well. And then there's also the census designated places. Trying to give you the best example I can think of. We were working with the town of Newcastle. Town of Newcastle, you can see it on a map as the town of Newcastle, but when you're really talking about where people live, it's going to be Chappaqua, it's going to be Millwood, town of Mount Pleasant. People live in Valhalla, they live in Hawthorne, they live in Thornwood. Well, those are zip codes, but they're not towns, they're little hamlets. And so we worked with the Census Bureau to identify, it was just last week, these census designated places. So Newcastle specifically asked if we could have Chappaqua and Millwood designated as census designated places, so that they'll be able to collect data on those specific areas. It's much more than just a neighborhood. It's really specific areas because they have, commercial areas to them as well. So again, census designated places, and these all have acronyms, by the way, but I'm not giving you the letters because, I can understand there's a lot of letters in the world that we live in. So starting on March 12th, the Census Bureau is going to start sending out your invitation to respond to the census. March 12th, not April 1st. March 12th, they're going to do mailing number 1, which gives you a code for every housing unit for you to go online and to respond to the census. Now, why we're worried? People over 75 are going to look at a code and say, you want me to do what? All right. So, think about the fact that we are definitely concerned. And for whatever reason, we agree with Owen. Children under 5, I think it's because people think because they're not going to school yet, who worries about them? So children under 5, in fact, are historically undercounted. And so we do need to make sure that the parents, all parents across the county, understand that those children under 5 are in fact very important. Matter of fact, we're reaching out to the daycare centers at one point in our list of things to do between now and April 1st. We're going to get to all the daycare centers to make sure that they can get to all the providers to make sure that they understand. Think about when you and I were all in school, how many of us were taught about recycling? None of us. Right? Recycling back in the 60s and 70s and 80s, who taught about it? Think about how we learned about it. Our children and maybe our grandchildren came home and said, Mom, why are you putting that in the garbage? You should recycle that. That's how we learned. So imagine the children in this county can be a wonderful resource. Imagine if we can have the children come home and say, Mom, did you respond to your census? It's really, really, really important. All right? So, and I do have to tell you, because this is adorable, the census has created a song for children to be able to come home and sing to you, to remind you to do your census. It was just published on September 20th, so there's all sorts of new updates on the census website. We're going to play it for our complete count committee on Thursday, so they can get it in your head, because it's going to get there. So anyway, so we're going to use the children who are in school. The Census Bureau has all sorts of curriculum online for different grade levels, and so we're encouraging different school districts to kind of adopt a week where they're going to actually incorporate the census into their curriculum. So students, like the students you have here today, so that students can understand at all different grade levels what the importance is of the census. I bet you didn't know Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson each had their own idea of how to conduct the census. Thomas Jefferson's idea won, by the way. All right? But again, that's the sort of history that comes with learning about the census. I can get really excited about the census. All right, so anyway, 95% of the households in the country are going to get an invitation by mail to respond. When are you going to get your first one? When's the first one going to get mailed? March 12th, exactly. The second one is, the second mailing is going out March 16th. Okay, the third mailing is going out March 26th. That's all the same household. So when Owen said get it in early, he means it. Get it in early or you're going to keep getting these letters. You'll still have an opportunity to respond. No, I'll get to that in 1 second, okay? Not to worry. So we started talking a little bit about children. Yes, I have 4 children. My youngest is a college student. My twin girls, who are 26, are also professional students. They're both in graduate school. So I have 3 students right now, 3 children who are students. The one lives in a dorm. I'm not going to count her. She just turned 19 last week. I can't say I have an 18-year-old. I'm getting old. I have a 19-year-old, but she lives in a dorm. She will be counted by the dorm, by the school, because she lives in group quarters. The housing office in the school will count my daughter. My twin daughters, who are both in grad school, one's in Salt Lake City and one's up at MIT, my twins will actually have to do their own paperwork because they both live in private housing. I'm not going to count them because they're not, even though their licenses may say they reside in New York. One lives in Salt Lake City and the other lives in Boston. So they will have the responsibility to answer that census. Now think about it though. They're 26. 10 years ago they were 16. They didn't know about a census. They didn't care about a census. Why would they have? So it's important for us not to just get to the 1 to 5-year-olds and then the 5 through, the first grade or kindergartners through high school students. It's important for us to get to those millennials. It's important for us to get to those kids in their 20s to help them understand that it's their obligation to respond to the census. And why is it important? Now, the one thing that might excite them is the fact that they get to do it right on their smartphones. You will be able to respond, not just online. If you have a smartphone, you will be able to answer those 9 questions on the census. By the way, it was supposed to be 10, but the citizen question got dropped. So our kids will be able to respond on their smartphones. But you have to remind them that they have to count themselves as private households. They live in private households. So they live in private housing. So again, none of my children, and my son and his wife are, they're separate. They have their own household. They know they have to count just them and not their 3 dogs. So anyway, that's why we're really concerned. How many people in Westchester have children living in college and think they're going to have to report them? They don't. The good news for New York, by the way, is that there's actually more students that come into New York for school because we've got such great schools in New York. So New York wins by college students. Not necessarily Westchester or Dutchess or Putnam or any of the individual counties, but New York as a whole wins because more students come into New York than exit to go to other places for school. Okay, again, another little factoid of data. So the Census Bureau is actually going to start counting in January, where they have to go to the most remote places in this country, in Alaska and Maine, and actually go count people who live in the little villages up in those areas. They have to do that by person. There's not regular mail service for those areas. So they're going to actually start counting in June. By February and March, they're going to be counting group quarters. Those are the prisons, the hospital, the assisted living centers, the school, the school dorms that I mentioned a minute ago. So the group quarters is a totally different counting exercise. And one of the things that they've learned this time around is there were group quarters last time around in the 2010 census that were not counted right away. Bedford has a bright red area on their map because the Bedford prison didn't respond. Harrison, Manhattanville College didn't respond. So there are bright red areas, and the Census Bureau has learned they have to get out and count these group quarters earlier so that we don't lose from that. All right, so in 2018, the Census Bureau conducted a survey across all 50 states where they emailed, they reached out to about 50,000 households for the survey that they called CBAMS. It's the Census Barriers, Attitude, and Motivators Survey. They wanted to get an understanding of, first off, how many people are going to respond to the census? If you are not, why not? And if you are, what's motivating you to respond? It's going to, and I'll tell you why that's important for us to understand. And so they asked these 50,000 households all sorts of questions related to the census. First and foremost is understanding that they did the same thing in 2008 for the 2010 census. In 2008, 14% of the households said they were not going to respond to the census. In reality, 24% did not respond to the census right away. So yeah, the census, when you start talking about the average response rate, it's in the 70s, 70%, 76%, thereabouts. But 24% in reality did not respond. So this time around, 2018, 33% of the responders said they were not going to respond to the census. If we add another 10% onto that, that's 43% of the population that's not responding to the census. That's very, very worrisome. That's important for Westchester to understand that. Why are we worried? That's one of the reasons, okay? So they also asked, what do you know about the census? Remember that 26-year-old I was just telling you about who was 16 years old 10 years ago? Only 79% of the responders said that they had any knowledge or any understanding of what the census was about and why it was important. 79%. That's 21% of the population that didn't even understand what the census had, familiarity with the census, understood why it was important. All right, so that's certainly important. They asked the question, if you're not going to respond, why? No surprises. Fear, apathy, they could care less, concern about confidentiality, distrust of the government, and what's in it for them? Many people don't realize that they do or do not use services, so what's in it for them? Then they also asked the question, if you are going to respond, why would you respond? And the greatest motivators, 94% of the population who responded to this, said if it meant better health care or funds for hospitals, ambulances, and health care, for fire services, for schools, for roads, and police and emergency services, that would be motivating for them to respond. If they knew that that was the benefit of responding to the census, that would encourage them to respond. So that helps us to inform on our marketing. We were actually coming up with some advertising that we want. The county's going to do advertising on our own bus stops and bus shelters on our buses, because people are sitting on the buses while they're going back and forth. Let's give them encouragement to respond to the census. And so it makes us think we should get a road construction project. We should put something in there about water. We should put a child, that's going off or sitting at school or eating lunch at school or something like that. That's the visions, the images that we should be using to promote people so that it brings it home, because if this is what motivates them to respond, then this is what we should tie it to, help them understand why it's important. So we do have, and I know it's going to be, you can't see it essentially, but we do have hard to count areas all over the county. The bright red are the worst. So even up in Yorktown, there's a little area in Yorktown, there's a census tract in Yorktown that's considered hard to count. City of Mount Vernon is by far the worst. In fact, the Rockefeller Institute did a survey of the 500 census tracts in New York State that they believe, they ranked them in terms of who they believe will be the most difficult areas to count. The city of Yonkers had the #1 census tract in all of New York State. The city of Mount Vernon had 15 census tracts. Okay, everybody is extremely concerned about getting an accurate count for the city of Mount Vernon. So in my spare time, I have been going out and about to all the local village and town boards to be able to encourage them to create complete count committees. Complete count committees are best when they're local, but the county does have one. On April 1st, County Executive George Latimer announced and started our own county complete count committee. And right now we have over 30 representatives from all different interest groups, all different areas. We have faith-based, we have nonprofits, we have the library system in there, we have education. Like I said, there's a whole variety of folks in there. And our complete count committee has now subdivided or broken up into 5 subcommittees. So we have one that's just based on talking about field operations, one focusing on marketing and communications. But then we've got one that deals with healthcare, faith-based organizations, and nonprofits. We've got one group that's just focused just on youth and education. Because again, that message is coming home from the children is going to be so important, and it's going to be so helpful from us getting that complete count. And Blanca, for the life of me, I'm forgetting what the last one is, just because it's still probably 8 o'clock in the morning. So,
You said field ops.
Field ops, communications,
Vulnerable population?
Oh, yes, special needs populations. Thank you. Our senior citizens and our disabled. Because think about it. How many, like I said, people over 75 are going to look at a computer code and say, "You want me to do what?" Okay. So, and as Owen mentioned before, the senior citizens are not going to open their doors. They're so scared of a scam showing up at their door. They are not going to open their doors. So we've got to do marketing specifically to the senior centers. We actually were just talking yesterday about we've got to get posters up. We're going to have to do presentations, get to every senior center in Westchester County. But I can't do this by myself, certainly. I'm going to need to train people who can actually take my presentation and go out to all of these senior centers in Westchester, just to be able to help us, to meet with groups like you, to help each of you understand why it's important and why we're worried, so that we, in fact, can get an accurate count here in Westchester. Whew. Sure.
So after we've talked about all of this work, the census has jobs. To wrap this all up, jobs, yes. If you go to 2020census.gov, where you'll find all kinds of information and materials, information about for schools, for your community organization, for your newsletters, for your blogs. It's all there. You can use it and promote. We have jobs, and we need to hire 34,000 people in this region in the next 6 weeks. We have 34,000. These are part-time jobs for people who will help us at all levels of actually going out in the spring and helping us as enumerators. And nights and weekends. So this is a part-time job. It pays well. All you have to do is go on to 2020census.gov. You have to be 18 years old and have a driver's license. And then you fill out your form, and you will be contacted eventually. There's a long process because that's a lot of people to process. Your work will not start until after the first of the year. But we have to start now hiring the people to make this work. So please, if you know anyone who needs a part-time job, these are well-paying jobs, 2020census.gov.
And who better to get into the hard-to-count neighborhoods but the people who live there? So we're going to be looking to encourage lots of people in Mamaroneck to apply for jobs, lots of people in Mount Vernon to apply for jobs, lots of people in Portchester to apply for jobs. We're going to be encouraging people all over Westchester, specifically local. Owen was talking about the New York area. Specific to Westchester and Putnam, there's actually going to be over 6,200 jobs, and the last we heard about a month ago is they had only hired about 1,500 of them. So again, there are still lots of jobs available, and they're going to be very, very flexible in terms of the hours that you can work, because you want to go knocking on people's doors when they're likely to be home, which is why I said nights and weekends. Yes, you had a question.
Yeah. Oh, right. I just wanted to ask, can you hear me? I know that apparently they used block data and all kinds of information when they rounded up the Japanese. They used census data, and they were able to manipulate them with the block data. Are there any things in the works that prevent that kind of thing? I know the census question is not going to be asked, but I think people are still worried about it.
As a result of that event, the confidentiality laws that are now in place emerged. So there's a whole array of things that came out of that incident that changed the way the Census Bureau operates and how the information is disseminated and who has access and the level of access they have. So who knows what the future brings, but based on that incident alone, the system changed.
And remember I told you that my staff, my office serves as a census affiliate, even we don't have access to that level of data. We can only access the public data that's out there. And when we had to review the street addresses, by the way, our staff had to, they were sworn that they could not share, and they could not even share the data with me. Okay, all I got was the rounded numbers. So they are really, really serious. They can't share it with other federal agencies. All right, they can collect data from other federal agencies. So in fact, by the way, this is the first time for the census. Remember I said if you don't respond to the census, they're going to come knocking on your door? This is the first time that they're allowed to actually, if you don't respond ultimately by the end of July, to answer your question, what if you're not home on April 1st? you will have time to respond afterwards. There's actually going to be a fourth mailing that will go out after April 1st. I think the third mailing will actually send you the actual census form, because they figured by then, if you haven't responded to 2 invitations, you'll just wait and maybe you'll fill out the one online. But because so many people are going to be responding to the census online, we're going to be able to get to see the data about the response rates in all of the areas across Westchester County. So we'll be able to see if there are areas that have low return rates, for us to be able to mobilize some of our complete count committees and volunteers that are already offering their services to be able to say, we need to figure out what's going on in this block, in the census tract. Why does this have a low response rate? So we'll be able to help the Census Bureau mobilize very quickly, which is why sometimes the local complete count committees are going to be really, really helpful. Yes?
Does the Census Bureau have an inspector general and a whistleblower separately?
You have to repeat the question.
So the question is, does the Census Bureau have inspector generals, and does the whistleblower law apply? The Census Bureau is a division, a department within the Department of Commerce. So all applicable federal laws apply to all of us. And so we're just a small part of the larger Department of Commerce, and there's an inspector general, and the whistleblower laws apply up and down in the federal system. So we're just a part of the game, the bigger puzzle. Yeah.
I just wanted to follow up with the statement that you made that other federal agencies you will not share with other federal agencies. What, if any, access could other federal agencies or the executive branch utilize in order to get access to that information? Is it available by judicial subpoena? Is it available by committee subpoena?
It has been tested in the courts, and it has been denied at every request. So people have sued. Various agencies have been looking for data, and not just the executive branch. I mean, the government's very large. The federal courts have said no. Article 13, it is not allowed.
Hello. I cannot emphasize how important the census is to small municipalities like the village of Larchmont. And how 2 things that we have mentioned already, the numbers at age 17 and a half when kids go away to college, that in a community like this is a reasonably significant number, and the distribution of the sales tax.
Yes.
Larchmont, no favors does it receive from an interesting number of its residents that are not counted in the census. I could argue about Purchase. I could argue about any of the municipalities that have dormitories and how that comes out to be kind of a real unfair distribution. That's more a matter of county and state law that I think ought to have a little equalizer in that distribution formula rather than the absolute number from the census. And so much for my statement. My question is, at the end of your analysis, does the individual municipality have the opportunity to review the numbers?
Yeah, I don't believe so.
Well, they should have.
And actually, let me tell you one of the things that we have found. When I told you, remember I told you there was a 24,000 unit difference between what the Census Bureau has in terms of housing units and what we found? One of the things that we did was we had, as a data collection group, we were like, why? And so we actually took a look at the reporting by our local municipalities to the monthly Census Bureau survey about building permits. And we found that there were 7 municipalities that were not responding to the monthly Census Bureau survey about how many building permits are they issuing. 2 of them were 2 of our large cities. Think of how much growth is going on just south of here. And they have not been reporting since the early 2000s. All right, so that tells you right there that there's a loss. One of the 3 municipalities in this area, by the way, is one of those 7. Not naming any names, but one of the 3. So anyway, one of the villages. But it doesn't begin with an L. So, one of the things that the planning department is doing starting today, literally I'm going from here, I have to run over to Terrytown. We, the planning department, we are hosting building permit survey trainings for the local municipalities so they can understand why is it so important for them to respond to that monthly survey. Now, they probably stopped doing it because they had staff turnover, all right? They probably stopped, somebody retired and somebody didn't realize that once a month they were getting an email asking them to respond. By the way, there's another smaller city that is on that list of not responders, to our local legislator sitting in the back. Exactly. If that doesn't open your eyes, when we saw these 7 municipalities, and by the way, we're hosting the trainings, the 4 trainings, in the other municipalities that also didn't respond, okay? So where did I say I'm going right now? That's another one. All right, so if we start catching these municipalities and train them and their board members and their clerks so that there could be continuity when there is staff turnover, then at least we're going to start to at least reduce that 24,000 unit count and have a better head count all along. So there is stuff that we can do because we were just like, what's wrong? Where's the disconnect? And that was one major disconnect.
The other thing that we've done is we are in the midst, we're just about finished with what we call address canvassing, where people went on the ground, walked up to houses, knocked on the door to find out how many people lived in buildings so that we would have the right addresses when the mailing went out. And I have to tell you, if you're any way influential in your community, when those census people went around to homes, they were turned down. The door was not open to them. They called the police. There were all kinds of things. Now, this is just for verifying an address. We can see the house from the street. That just proves to us how difficult it will be when enumerators are asking their questions. This was just verifying that, yes, this is the address for this building. Yes, there's only one family here. So this is not a distant reality. This just happened last week, and it wasn't far from here. And it happens all over the nation because people are afraid. It is not anything else than people are afraid of people coming up to your door and knocking. Our job is to be sure that people understand that census workers are clearly identified. And if there's a concern with that person, they should call someone. But understand that it's our job to do this and the benefit. And that's why we're here. This is very, very important that all of us talk about how open we have to be and to be sure you respond early and by email or online, by phone or by paper before we have to send somebody out to the community. You had your hand up.
Yes, thank you. Hello, I'm Gerandi Martinez. I work at the Community Resource Center. I'm also on the Complete Count Committee. I just wanted to kind of personalize this a little bit. My mother's a domestic worker for 30 years. If any of you hire or employ domestic workers, you have a lot of influence with your employees because they trust you. And so if as an employer, you say to your domestic worker or your gardener or a person that you know at your house of worship, hey, have you filled out the census? They are going to take that as, oh, my person who I've worked for 20 years or 12 years or 2 years is asking me if I've filled out the census, and they feel safer if somebody who they trust is informing them. So I think that we absolutely have to train municipalities, but we also have a lot of clout within our own person to train, to ask other people we know for years, people we employ, people at our house of worship, and that if you know somebody who maybe you don't want to fill it out for them, send them to the Community Resource Center or their house of worship where there are sure to be kiosks and computer labs and libraries, send them to the libraries, where we are going to be doing this work and filling out the census with them and for them because we will be trained to do that. And I didn't really have a question, but I wanted.
Gerandi, thank you. Let me just build on that just a little bit. One of the things that the Complete Count Committee is going to start working on Thursday when we meet again is identifying census hubs. We're going to do it right now so that on October 22nd, when the Census Bureau has their recruitment day, where they're looking to hire 22,000 people, have them register that day, We want to identify places around the county where computers would be available without us needing to provide the computers, where we're going to be able to take some of the high school students who are volunteering, the different groups of high school students who are really good at technology, who want to be able to help people at the library and other places. So we're going to start identifying these census hubs where people will be able to go and get access to a computer. You don't want to do it on your own computer at home? That's fine. We'll be identifying these hubs where people will be able to go and have a question or two answered, and somebody will be available to be able to help them with the technology.
I just wanted to clarify one thing. A volunteer cannot help collect data information.
Right.
Only a person hired by the Census Bureau who's taken the oath I spoke about that sends us to jail and gives us a big fine if we break the law, right? It is very serious. I'm telling you, if a piece of paper is on your desk with a name, it's not a good thing. Personal information is primary in terms of being out of the public's view. No one can see it. So we can bring people to census hubs, but the person has to fill out the form themselves. We can't do it for them. I just wanted to make that clear to everybody in the room.
Just hold it closer to your mouth.
Yeah, I have a question. I spoke last week with Mario Garcia, and he indicated to me that it was not that we didn't have a complete count committee in this area.
I believe the Village of Larchmont has organized
I
one.
was surprised to see such a large group this morning. Obviously, there must be, or the structure for that must be existing.
I understand that Karen Barnes is working with the government in Larchmont and the government in Mamaroneck both. They may not have completely gelled yet, but they're underway. And Karen is handling that. She's my colleague. I suggest that you voice your concern to your leadership in the communities, sure that you're there and present to making sure it happens. But it is in process. Karen has already spoken to them. I actually, before I came here, I checked with her, and she gave me that information on the phone. So,
I just want to ask. I work with a senior citizen organization, and some of the people that are in our organization have aides that sleep in their home and live there, basically. Not every day, but most days. So they should be counting that aid. That's a good thing that we need to maybe disseminate in our information that we send out. Thank you very much.
there's a group, Aging in Home, or Aging in Place. Aging in Place. And I'm in contact with them to help through the Complete Count committees to get that information out. We have a lot of work to do.
One of those 9 questions on the census that they ask is, what is the relationship of every person that you list to the person that is identified essentially as the head of household? And it could very well be that it's not, that there is no relationship, there is no familial relationship. Just be roommates or whatever it is. But one of the few questions that they actually ask is, what is the relationship? So I can identify my spouse or my children or whatever it is, okay? Yes.
Oh, hi, I'm Laura Eckley. I'm the director of Larchmont Public Library. And I just wanted to follow up on an earlier comment about Karen Barnes from the Census Field Office. She is coming to the Larchmont Public Library to give a presentation to the community on November 7th at 7 p.m. in the Village Center. I have flyers. I feel like everybody here has a lot of questions, so go home and really think about those, and then we'll bring them to Karen. But I'm just sitting here. I already have more questions about what we can and can't do in the library. You know, if we're not actual census workers. So
You can do everything but fill out the census form.
Okay.
You have,
good to know. So
you can bring in volunteers, you can have tables, you can be maybe one of Norma's hubs, but everything, it's the personal information. Personal information is protected. So, for example, a census worker would be the person to stand next to the person and help them translate the questions, right? or they could pick up the phone and call, and we have people in many, what is it, 26 languages. I'm still asleep, so my numbers are not good. I apologize.
Sorry, my understanding is there's about 15 that the forms are actually available in, but that there's 59 or 57, something like that, that you can actually call and get assistance with online.
Thank you. Yeah, just a quick question. I looked at the 1940 census. I saw my mother, my aunt. I saw the neighbors. I saw how much money they were making, where they were born, how many were boarders. It's interesting how many boarders there were at the end of the Depression. What you're saying now is that all that information collected now will not be available for the future?
What they are actually doing is they wait 80 years to release census data. They figured by then most people have passed on. But yeah, it's 80 years. So the 1940 census data is now is essentially just out now. The last time I was looking for, I could find 1930 census. I could find my own parents, you know, and where they were and how old they were. Yeah, it's pretty amazing being able to do that. But the Census Bureau does wait 80 years before they really make it public.
So just a follow-up quick to that, and then another question, which is, that sounds like not the census data that you're talking about collecting now. That sounds like the American Community Survey. I mean, all of that in-depth information. Mm-hmm. Was that collected by the census before? And that, if you want to answer it, and then I have my actual question.
If you look at, you can actually see the actual census records where somebody actually filled in and where they wrote the name and how old they were and what their occupation was and what the relationship was. There was a whole kind of like an accounting spreadsheet that went across with all these different fields that were filled in.
And so my actual question is just to close the loop on our local community. I asked this question at the last Larchmont Summit, and Nancy Seligson, our town supervisor, was here and said that it had just been decided that there would be a tri-municipal complete count committee, and we have a couple of board members, council members here. I don't know if either of them would like to speak to that and what we can do as local community members.
I had understood that there was going to be, the 3 municipalities were forming the one complete county. I'm going to come out and talk to the whole group. I am going to be sending an email out to all of our complete count committees in the county. There are 18 of them, by the way, already. And next Tuesday night, I'm going 7:30 to Village of Sleepy Hollow Village Board meeting, and then 9 o'clock at night, I'm going to Town of Yorktown to convince both of them to do it as well. So yeah, we have 18 complete count committees already, and we're encouraging a couple more, because again, remember I told you there are areas that were red, and I really need those municipalities to kind of step up. But we're willing to give as much guidance as we can to these local complete count committees, because I've actually mapped out all of the activities for our complete count, what we need to do between now and September of next year. And so we'd be happy to share that information with the local complete count committees so that they have a roadmap. They have some sense of where they can be productive in their local communities.
Last question.
Well, now you scared.
Okay, well, I'm sorry. I want to thank our speakers. It was really enlightening. I think it's made all of us feel a sense of urgency about the census, why we need to do it, and do it thoroughly. Thank you so much. I have one last announcement.
I just wanted to announce that the CRC is having its annual fundraising gala on November 21st, and we'd really like your support. We'd really like your attendance. We'd like all of it. Thank you.
And also, at home on the sound, if you know senior citizens and they're not members, November is free.
You can't be heard.
I'm with At Home on the Sound, and if you know senior citizens that are not members of At Home on the Sound, November is a free month. You can participate in all of the programs that we have in the month of November, which is a lot. So I encourage you, if you know people, let them know. November is free. The phone number for the office is 899-3150, and I'll be there in about 10 minutes.
Thank you.
So I'll be answering the phone.
Thank you. I want to thank everybody for coming, and our next meeting on November 12th is going to be about zoning, housing, and local development. So we hope to see you on November 12th. Thank you for coming today.